Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Menachot Daf Kufav. We are really at the last stretch, which you'll get a bit of a sense of today. I find at the end of Masechtot, we often go back and we see a lot of sugyot that we've seen before. In this case, since we've been learning Menachot and Zvachim, so you end up seeing things that we learned also in Zvachim, and kind of we've seen so much that sugyot start to repeat themselves a lot more at the end of Masechtot. That leads me to remind everyone to register to get your Zoom link for the Siyum on Friday. On Thursday night. The Siyum will be Thursday night, 8:30. The Hebrew Siyum is Friday morning for those interested in joining at 10 o'clock. The Siyum will have Alana Steinhain giving us a perspective on Menachot, the Zoom out perspective, and Hannah Hasson, one of our learners, will also be speaking, and we'll obviously be finishing the last daf together, which again, a reminder, on Thursday night, we're going to learn the daf for Friday, so there's no regular daf on Friday. It'll be a good opportunity to listen. First of all, you can get ahead and listen to the Shabbat daf, of the first daf of Chulin, and to listen to the introduction of Iyar, which will be up by then. Okay, let's get started. Also, one other thing, I forgot to mention in Shir that Alana Steinhain Shir went up in Din and Daf this week about Kedusha and Isurei Hana'ah, okay, which came up from a sugya already back in Kuf Aleph. Might feel like a long time ago at this point. Never too late to listen. Okay, let's get started with our sugya. What we saw in the previous section was a person who vows to do all sorts of things. Now, I'll already maybe go back to the Mishna because we're going to compare this. It's going to be the same idea in the next Mishna, which is just good to point out. Just when we say Harei Alai Saron or Esronot, we're going to go by the minimum. Someone says, I'm going to bring something. What they're required to do is whatever the minimum is. They don't need to bring the maximum. So if I say, I'm going to bring an isaron, all I need to bring is isaron. That's pretty obvious. No one needs to tell me that. But if I say esronot, which is plural, which could be 2, could be 60. But we assume I meant 2. Okay? We go by the minimum. It's very different from the case where we have to go maximum, which is if I say, I said a certain amount, I don't remember what I said. In order to fulfill a statement of I'm going to bring X without saying exactly how many, but I'm going to bring this, and we're going to see it not just in minchas, but in lavona and eitzim, and that's how we're going to end today, and some other sugyas tomorrow about wine and all that. What's the minimum? We go by minimum, because if I make a commitment, and I didn't specify how many, so in order to fulfill my commitment, I have to give a minimum amount. But if I said I specified an amount, I have no recollection what I specified. Well, in order to fulfill that vow, I'm going to have to bring the maximum, right? And that's how we got to these extreme cases in our Mishna. So we're in the middle of figuring out. If somebody said, I'm going to do it, I'm going to give a mincha of a particular type, and I don't remember which type. So they have to bring all 5 types. Then we said, wait a minute, according to Rabbi Shimon, it should be 6 types, because Rabbi Shimon had 6 types he had the chetzi rikikim, chetzi chalot. So we're in the middle of the difficulties on Rabbi Shimon, right? We had the first difficulty was, if you say that, then you're ending up to bring an isaron that comes from 2 esronim. Ideally, and a log that comes from 2 log, because in the end, okay, let's just go to how it could be Rabbi Shimon. So I think I forgot to remind us of one more step. So first we said the Mishnah must not be Rabbi Shimon because he has 6 types. He says you only have to bring 5 types. Let's go through the 5 types. Solet, the basic one, which is raw dough when you do the komets, or the ones that are either fried or baked before. So we have the 2 fried, which is the machvat and the marcheshet, the flat pan and the deep pan. And then we have the 2 mafet tanur, the rikikim and chalot. But it doesn't have here to bring half rikikim, half chalot, or some combination. So then we said, oh no, Abaye said you actually could say it's Rabbi Shimon because in any case you're bringing 10 rikikim, 10 chalot, and you can make a stipulation and say any arrangement, any number of combinations of this, right? You could be 1 and 9, and that will be for my obligation, and the rest will be for Nadaba. So you're anyway bringing the 10 and that could count, and therefore 5 is sufficient because the rikikim and chalot are included in those 5, and then you can be Yotze, also a 50-50 or a 20-80 combo. So then we started with some difficulties on that opinion because we said, number one, if you say that, you're taking 1 isaron from 2 esronim. In other words, in general, to bring a mincha, you have to bring 1 isaron with 1 log of shemen. Here you're bringing 2 because you're bringing for the chalot and the rikikim, and then you're saying an isaron of that or a log of that is going to my mincha. And it doesn't seem like that's the way it's supposed to be done. To which you say, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon, they actually said we have a tradition that Rabbi Shimon held that he has no problem with that. So that would work, because we're talking about Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Then we did the same thing about the kmitza. How are you going to do the kmitza? Because you're doing a kometz from the rikikim and the rikikim and the chalot and the chalot. But we want a kometz if it's 50-50, right? Again, we don't know. Maybe it's all rikikim and then you've done it right. All chalot, you've done it right. But if it's the 50-50, we don't know which you said. How are you going to take a kometz from the chalot on the rikikim and the rikikim on the chalot, right? Because the one on the chalot is going to cover some chalot and some rikikim. That doesn't work, to which we answer, top of our daf, Shamina leila Rabbi Shimon damar im kamatzva labi yadome echal shneim yatsa. Right, Rabbi Shimon, we have a tradition that Rabbi Shimon actually thinks that's okay. Third option, the ha'ikar motar shemen. The remainder of the oil is a problem, because if you remember rikikim, what do? You do the mishicha, right? Mishuchim bashemen, as opposed to the chalot or blulot bashemen. So the chalot are mixed with oil. The rikikim, you just put oil on top. Now, what do you do with the remainder of it? Well, the remainder, if it's just rikikim, the remainder goes to the kohanim. Whatever oil you don't use, you put this X on the top, and the rest goes to the kohanim. But if you do half and half, you might remember, okay, this is the first review of our daf, review of an earlier sugya, there was a whole machloket what you do in the rikikim chalot case. If you have a 50-50 mixture or some sort of combo mixture, so according to one of the opinions, motar hashemen, so here, ha'ika motar shemen, to eat mechza chalot or mechza rikikim, if it's half-half or part-part, motar hashemen machziro lachalot, it goes into the chalot. You put the oil into the chalot that get mixed with oil. So all the extra oil of the rikikim goes to the chalot. But ikulu rikikin amar. But if it's all rikikim, motar hashemen echal kohanim, it just goes to the kohanim. It's the remainder. So what are we supposed to do with the oil here? Right? You can't fulfill both, because if you give it to the kohanim, then you're not putting in the chalot. If you put in the chalot, you're not giving it to the kohanim. And we don't know which option. Maybe it was all rikikim or all chalot, or maybe it was, right? We don't know. So what are you going to do? Or maybe it's 50-50. So they say, oh, that's not a problem, because that was an issue. There was a machloket about it. And notice where Rabbi Shimon holds. Each time, our solution is, oh, we know Rabbi Shimon holds this. And this time, it's not just, oh, we have a tradition that he said this, but here it is. Ki Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. We go like Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. That's not the same Rabbi Shimon. But Titania, we're going to see in the Bright, he quotes Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda omel mishum Rabbi Shimon. In the name of Rabbi Shimon, that's our Rabbi Shimon. Moshchan kimin ki umotar hashemen ne'echal kohanim. You make this ki, this X formation, and the remainder, in the mechza case, the remainder of the oil gets eaten by the kohanim. So now we have no problem, because Rabbi Shimon himself holds that the remainder goes to the kohanim, or at least Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said the name of Rabbi Shimon. Obviously, someone thinks Rabbi Shimon said otherwise, because this is all within Rabbi Shimon's opinion. But he thinks the motar shemen gets eaten by the kohanim, in which case the same thing's going to happen with the motar shemen if it was all rikikim or if it was mechza, and we have no problem. So we've resolved all the issues according to Rabbi Shimon, and really Rabbi Shimon could be included in this 5 number. Now we're going to attack this from a different perspective, which is Amalei Rav Kahana le Rav Ashi. Why isn't there a 6th in the Mishnah? There's a 6th possibility. Someone could voluntarily offer a mincha nesachim. Mincha nesachim is the one that goes, the libations, with the korbanot. Now, obviously, that's not what they're doing. They're saying, I want to bring a korban like that on my own as a voluntary offering. Now, how do we know you could do this? Well, the Amar Rava explained that you could do this. Right, because you might have thought libations only go with korbanot, okay, the mincha libations. But mitnadev adam mincha nesachim b'chol yom. According to Rava, if you want, you can, any day you want, every day if you want, you can offer a minchat nesachim. So he comes and he says, if so, then why didn't we say there's 6 possibilities? So let mincha, marcheshet, mafet tanur, the 2, rikikim and chalot, and minchat nesachim. Why is that not on the list? So now we're going to say the following. There's going to be 5, the way we're going to set this up, Rav Ashi is going to answer there's 5 differences between a minchat nesachim and a regular mincha, these voluntary minchas. Even though a minchat nesachim could be brought as a voluntary offering, there's no way that this person who isn't sure which one they promised would have thought that maybe he did a minchat nesachim, because it's so completely different that if that was what he had voluntarily offered, he would have known it. Or right, the idea is there's no way that this person who said there's no way he would have confused it and said, it's maybe mincha, it's maybe solet, marcheshet, machvat. Maybe it's one of those, and maybe it's nesachim. No way would those two ever be in the same, those six, right? Those five and the one would never be in somebody's thoughts as getting confused between the two, because they're so completely different. And then we're going to list the five differences. So that's what introduced by the words kikam stapkale, when he was misupak. What did I say? Okay, now there's a siman for the five, siman yachi biglal lavona belog mekamtza, but we're going to see what those all are. He was misapka ba biglal yachid. He was mistapka about all the korbanot that come with individual offering, as an individual offering. Ba biglal tzibor lo mistapkale. He wasn't confused about, he wasn't thinking, oh, maybe I brought something that often goes with communal offerings. That's the mincha can be brought always by an individual, but the minchat nesachim comes very often with a communal offering, and it could be brought as a communal nesachim, right? The korban tamid is brought with nesachim every day. That belongs to the tzibor. So the person wasn't thinking of a korban that maybe I gave him a set of mincha that often comes with communal, in a communal manner. Second one, kikam stop gale, when the person said, we can, again, this is just words we're putting in their mouth, but the point, or in their head, the person who was in doubt was thinking about ba biglal atzma, about minchas that come on their own. Ba biglal zevach lo mistapkale, not something that, again, now in this case it was individual, it wasn't this. In this case it didn't come with a korban, but often the base case of a minchat nesachim comes along with a korban. I was talking about menachot that come on their own, they're standalones, right? And therefore I didn't think about, in my head wasn't a minchat nesachim, which is a totally different kind of korban. Kikam stapkale, third difference, tu'una levona. We're going to have all this review of minchat nesachim. What typifies a minchat nesachim as opposed to a regular one? All menachot, or almost all menachot, except for a few exceptions to the rule, come with oil and frankincense. And then there's some that come with no oil, but yes, frankincense, some that come with none, right? Remember we had that Mishna with the four possibilities. Neither one. So the nesachim doesn't come with frankincense. It comes with oil, but no frankincense. So I was thinking of menachot. I know I gave a voluntary offering. I meant a mincha that usually comes with frankincense, but but I wasn't concerned that maybe I talked about one that doesn't have frankincense, which is the nesachim. And kikam stapkale ba belog, ba b'shlosha lugin lo mistapkale. Difference number 4. I was talking about ones that come with a log of oil, not the ones that come with 3 log. Remember the minchat nesachim? The smallest amount of oil that you bring in a minchat nesachim is the keves, the sheep. What do you bring? Remember, 1 isaron with 3 log of oil. So 3 log is the minimum for a minchat nesachim. I wasn't talking about those. And last one, kikam stapkale. This is the biggest difference, really, I think, because it's a big inherent difference. Tu'una kmitza. Normal mincha needs a kmitza. You take the komets and you burn the komets on the altar. She'ena tu'una kmitza lo mistapkale. I wasn't talking about one that doesn't need kmitza. What does it mean it doesn't need kmitza? It means the entire mincha gets burned on the altar. So that's a completely different case, because we burn the whole thing on the altar. So that's not what I was thinking about. So basically, when a person says, I gave a type of mincha, and I don't remember which type, was talking about only one of the 5 types, or /6 of the half of Rabbi Shimon possibly, but I wasn't thinking of a minchat nesachim, which is in a completely different category for the 5 different reasons that we mentioned. Now we're going to go back to that case of perashti mincha shel esronim. I said I was going to bring a mincha of esronim in a vessel, 1 vessel, but I didn't say how many. And now we have the machloket rabbis and Rebbe. Do you bring 1 mincha of the largest number of 60? Or according to Rebbe, you have to bring 1 to 60 in 60 different bowls. Today we're going to see a braita where they actually give the number. I said I didn't know the number. If you count 1 to 2 plus 2 plus 3, today we're going to see that number in a braita. So the braita is going to expand a little bit and bring another case that's an expansion of this case, where you're going to bring even more. Okay, just wait. And, which is really a combo of the previous case we just discussed and this case. And we're going to get to the numbers of how many. So Perashti mincha shel esronim. Tanu Rabbanan. So they quote a Braita. Perashti mincha, I have in parentheses here, v'kavati b'kli echad, and I said they had to be in one vessel. This is clearly an interpretation, because it is how it's interpreted, but it's not the words of the Mishna, and it's probably not the words of the Braita, because someone's telling us, take out those words, someone added it. But it is true, right? What he meant is, or she meant is, and I want them all to be in one vessel, right? That's what we mean by mincha of esronim. It means a mincha in one bowl. Ve'eni yodea ma perashti, but I'm not sure what I said. This is the exact case in our Mishnah. Yavi mincha shel 60 esronim divrei chachamim. So chachamim say, bring 60 esronim. One mincha in one bowl. And then, again, now, I a little bit, not tricked you, but steered you a little bit into something that you're going to have to undo a little bit today. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't necessarily right, okay? Because we interpreted the Mishnah according to the way Rashi said it. And Rashi then, I can't remember now if I specified this, but Rashi there says, I'm explaining this based on one of the interpretations on Daf Kuvav, okay? So we said, what did the rabbis basically say? There's no problem to take this 60 and say, if, right, it's all my obligation, this is my obligation. If not, whatever I said that I had to give, that's going to be my obligation. The rest will be a nedava, right, will be voluntary. That's only one of 5 interpretations as to what's the machloket. And Rebbe, who doesn't allow this and says you have to bring each one in a separate bowl, right, that's what we're going to read right now. Rebbe Omer, Yavi Menachot shel esronim me'achav ad shishim, and here they add, Shehein 1,830, it's 1,830, okay? Then, basically, he says you can't do that. You can't have one bowl, 2 different things, and say, oh, you can't mix chova and nedava. It doesn't work. So you have to do them each in separate bowls, and one of those bowls will be your chova, whichever one happened to be, exactly the amount that you voluntarily offered, and all the rest are going to be separate nedava korbanot. Okay, now we thought it was because, that was the interpretation we gave, because he doesn't think that you can do that stipulation. He doesn't think you could say, oh, whatever's my chova is my chova, the rest. You can't bring chova and nedava in one bowl, okay, and say, oh, we're going to split this. Now, we're going to see, like I said, 4 other interpretations as to what their machloket is today. So you have to a little bit break out of assuming that's the machloket. Not only that, but we're going to raise all sorts of difficulties with that opinion. So now the Braita continues. If you said, here's the next case, which combines the previous case as well. Perashti ve'eni yodeh ezo mehem perashti. I'm not sure which mincha I said. Ve'eni yodeh kama perashti, and I'm not sure how many esronim. So you're not sure of the number, and you're not sure how many of the mincha, which mincha. So now what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to bring, according to, right, Yavi 5 menachot shel 60 esronim, shem 300 divrei chachamim. According to the rabbis, you're going to have to bring 5 different minchas, solet, machva, marcheshet, rikikim, chalot, each with a bowl of 60 esronim. So you're going to end up with 300 esronim. According to Rebbe, this is going to get really extreme. Rebbe Omer, Yavi 5 menachot shel 60 esronim, me'echad va'ad 60, shehem 9,150. He's going to get to 9,150 esronim, because you're going to take that number 1,380 and multiply it by 5, because you're now going to have to bring 1 in one bowl, 2 in one bowl, 3 in one bowl, up to 60 5 times, because you have to do each of those 60 in one method, then each in the next type of mincha, and so on. An incredibly extreme case. B'mai kamiflagay. Right? You have to wonder what's going on here in this Mishnah or in this Braita. Like, they're really talking about things that would almost never happen. Maybe they're trying to just tell people, be incredibly clear in your neders and don't forget what you vowed. Remember this whole approach also of, and we're actually going to get to this in the beginning of Chulin, about it's not good to take a neder. Okay? They didn't like people taking vows. And maybe this is a way of scaring people into saying, you better watch what you say. And if you do take a vow, make sure to remember, because you get yourself into big trouble, right? And that's possibly a way of reading this. Okay, let's see what the machloket is. So we're going to have different rabbis who are going to offer different suggestions, although Rava will appear twice here. B'mai kamiflagay. Amar Rav Chisda. B'mutar lachnis chulin la'azara kamiflagay. Okay, this is something completely different than we said. And we're going to understand the opinion of Rebbe differently, okay, or the opinion of the rabbis differently, actually. Can you bring chulin into the azara? Actually, Rebbe is going to be the same, but the rabbis are going to be different, which is, The rabbis say, Rabbi Savar, let's start with Rabbi. Asur lachnis chulin lazara, v'Rabbanan sarvei mutar lachnis chulin lazara. Okay, I think it's easier if I start with the rabbis, even though the Gemara started with Rabbi. What is chulin lazara? The truth is there's a range of what chulin lazara could be. You can't bring something that's not sanctified into the azara. Okay, like one example they bring is a Kohen wearing regular clothes. What, they can't bring them into the azara? That's chol, right? Their bigadim are holy. What if they change in the azara or something, or they wear, right? So there's certain things that for sure you can bring chulin lazara. Okay, like some people say, okay, clothes for sure they can wear regular clothes if they're not doing the avoda, because otherwise you're going to have a problem. If you remember, there's cases where regular Yisraelim come into the temple. They come in with regular clothes, right? So that can't be. If we go to the other extreme, things that we burn on the altar, okay, you can only burn kudshim on the altar. You can't burn chulin on the altar. So everyone agrees about that. This case is in between. What are we talking about here? Well, again, you have to understand the case differently now. You take the rabbis. The rabbis say you don't know how many esronim. So what do? Now, you have to remember the way a mincha works. You take a kometz and you burn it on the altar, and the rest goes to the kohanim. So come the rabbis and say, I have a very easy solution. You don't know how many. In any case, all you're burning is a kometz. So when the kohen picks up the kometz, we're going to call that's a part of the sanctified part, whatever part he dedicated. And it's going to cover whatever part of this dough was promised. The rest of it is just chulin. It's just, we're not doing like a nedava and, right, the rest, like we said before, the rest will go as a voluntary offering. No, we just have one offering here. The one that we have, take the kometz, burn it. That covers whatever part of this dough you needed to do it on. The rest of it is just chulin. Now, who cares if it's chulin? Because it's going to the kohanim anyway. The kohanim get the remainder. So the kohanim end up with the remainder. Part of it is really remainder, and part of it is just chulin. And the fact that this was in the azara, who cares? It didn't get burned on the altar, so it's fine. And Rebbe says, no way, no how. This is like part of a mincha offering. You're taking a kometz out of it, and part of it you're calling chulin? That doesn't work. That's not allowed. Okay, that's option number one. Option number two is the one that we already said. Rava Amar. Okay, according to Rava, we could say that nobody thinks you can bring chulin. We're not talking about that the rest of it is chulin. The rest of it, like we said, is going to be nedava, according to the rabbis, and they have no problem doing that, and Rebbe doesn't like that. Can you mix chova and nedava? Now, at first it seems like the rabbis have a pretty good solution. Just make a stipulation. But we're going to see that there's a lot of problems in that. And Rebbe's actually going to look much more intuitive. Rabbanan sarvei mutar la'arev chova b'nedava. And again, you're going to stipulate. Here's my kometz. This is going for my chova. Now here comes the problem. What about the rest? Well, you're going to have to do another kometz for the nedava. So basically, according to the rabbis, you're going to take 2 kometzim out of this. The first will cover your chova. The second will cover your nedava. But there's going to be a lot of problems with this. Okay? We'll get there in a minute. So now they say, Amar Abaye Rava Rabbanan Amar Amri Mutar Larev Chavav Nedava Habi'inan Shnei Kamatzim. Okay, so now he starts off with asking, this is a question, but it's not going to work unless you take 2 kamatzim. The assumption they thought in the beginning was, well, you take a kometz and you stipulate, like when Abaye heard this, I guess, he says to Rava, what are you talking about? All you did was take 1 kometz, because he thinks, of course, you're not burning 2 kamatzim, because it's going to be a major problem. So why is that a problem? First of all, if the whole thing is chova, 60, let's say you promised 60, you can't take 2 kamatzim. What's the second kometz for? Nothing. Okay, so he's like, what? You're going to do 2 kamatzim? You're going to have to do 2 kamatzim if you want to say, within this bowl, we have 2 different things going on. Chova and nedava. But again, maybe it's all chova. So he says, you're going to need 2 kamatzim. So Rava says, yeah, no problem. De kametz v'hadar kametz. Yeah, you're going to do 1 kametz and then you're going to do another kametz. So then they said, comes the Abaye, and he says, what are you talking about? Hakakametz michova nedava minedava chova. Just like we had the rikikim on the chalot and all that, you're now taking a kometz from a mixture of chova and nedava, possibly, right? We don't know, but maybe it's a mixture. And again, right? Remember, why is it a maybe? Because maybe all 60 were your chova, and then there's no nedava. But we're going to take a kometz out of your, right? We're going to say this is a kometz on part of this, right? But in the end, you have a mixture of chova and nedava. So your kometz is coming out of a chova nedava, and your other kometz of nedava is coming from chova and nedava. Mixed up, that shouldn't work. So he says, no, I have no problem. Rava says, Detali lebeda kohen damar kolechet amati yada de kohen hashta chova ulavasof nedava. They say the kohen can determine which part of this is chova, which is nedava. When the Kohen does the first kmitza, he says this is going on the chova. And it says ulevasof nedava. What he means is that when he does it the second time, we assume he takes first the komets of the obligation, then he takes the komets of the nedava, and the Kohen can determine, okay, I'm obviously taking this from what I'm determining now is the nedava. So now they say, but wait, akchure hechi miktar. But what's going to be the order of the burning? Now we're going to have a problem. Assuming first you took a komets of the chova, then you took a komets of the nedava. Now the question is, and we're going to show that there's a problem in the order of burning in both directions. Whether you first burn the chova, which you would have thought intuitively that's what you would do first, we're going to have a problem. And if you first burn the nedava, we're going to have a problem. And this again is a review of all sorts of halachot we saw earlier. Lichter nedava bereisha. If you do the nedava first, dechova hechi miktala. How are you going to? If you do the nedava first, dechova hechi miktala. How are you going to do? Right? They kind of first say this is the obvious one that's not going to work. If you would burn the nedava first, you're not going to be able to burn the chova after that. Why? Dilma kula chovahu. What if the whole thing is chova? Now you have a problem because you took part of the nedava, part of the chova. If all 60 esronim are chova, and you burnt part of what, in the end, is really supposed to be the remainder of the chova. Because remember, once you take the komets out of both, you're left with the remainder. So if one really wasn't a komets, and you burnt it on the altar, now, really, it was supposed to be part of the shirayim. Now, we have a halacha that we learned. Now, we're missing shirayim. Because what you did is you took some of the remainder. If all 60 were you're part of your neder, let's say I promised, and I don't remember what I promised, but I promised 60. And you took out a komets from the remainder, and you burnt it, and now you want to do the komets that you're really obligated to do. This is a classic case of Amar Shirayim shechasru ben kmitza lahaktara. If after you did the komets, before you burnt the mincha, we learned this a while ago, but maybe you'll remember it. And then you're missing some of the remainder. Something happens to it, someone comes and eats it. Or in this case, we burned it on the altar. So now it's missing some of the shirayim. You're not allowed to burn it now. Okay? Ein maktir komets alehem. You can't burn that komets anymore. If you lost some of the shirayim between the time that you did the kmitza, which we did already, we started off with kmitza, then we do the kmitza both, then we want to burn them both. So if we burn the nedava first, you're missing shirayim. If the whole thing was chova, because you have to be open to all the possibilities, right? Make sure you've covered all your possibilities. So you definitely can't do the nedava first. If you do the chova first, you're going to have a different problem. Lichter chova bereisha. Okay, let's take the obligatory one and put that first. The nedava hechim miktala. Now you're not going to be able to burn the second one, the voluntary one. Why not? Turning out Abaye. Dilma kula chovahi. Again, if the whole thing is chova. Now, remember, we said the Kohen can determine which is the nedava, but that's only if there is nedava in there. If there's no nedava, then it's what are you burning on the altar now? Shirayim. Do you remember this halacha? After you burn the komets on the altar, you can't burn the shirayim on the altar because that's part of this halacha of kol shehu mimenu liishim hareyu b'bal taktiru. What does that mean? Remember the pasuk about kol se'or v'chol dvash lo taktiru. You can't burn on the altar. Mimenu ishel Hashem. Well, they darshan this lo taktiru mimenu, that anything that from mimenu you burned, the rest is not allowed to go on the altar as ishel Hashem. So, if the whole thing was chova and you burnt the kmitza, the rest of it is forbidden to go burn on the altar for any sort of sacrifice. And what are you doing? You're burning it for the sake of this minchat nedava. So we're stuck. Can't do that, you can't do that. So how's this opinion going to work? Now it was what I said. Rabbi seems much more intuitive because there's one komets. Once you start with two kometzim, you're going to have a major problem. So they answer this question. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bered Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Dim masik lehu l'shem eitzim uche Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, we're going to say like this. When you burn that second kometz, you're going to burn the chova first. Now you said, okay, well, what's the problem? How am I going to burn the second one if the whole thing was obligatory? And then we're burning something that is not allowed to be burnt. You're not allowed to burn it. We're going to see this in a minute, according to Rabbi Eliezer. And this is Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi's answer, but he's saying, according to Rabbi Eliezer's approach, maybe I'll just read it first, and then we'll explain what Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said. Ditanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, l'reach nichoach i'atama aleh, aval atama aleh l'shem eitzim. You can't offer something l'reach nichach as a offering to God if you already, in other words, you can't take shirayim and offer them as an offering to God. But what can you do? You can offer them l'shum eitzim. You can say, I'm just using this as firewood on the altar. So you could put that kometz there to help the fire going. Okay? You could do it like that. And then you could say, like this. So let's go back to Rosh Ben Pazi. You make a stipulation. When you're about to burn that second kometz, what do you say? If my original vow was not on 60 but any less, then this is for my voluntary. And I'm now sacrificing the kometz as my voluntary mincha offering. But if my original vow was on 60 and this is not a voluntary offering, then I'm just putting this as fuel for the fire. And that's it. And that resolves it. Now, in order to say that, though, you have to hold like Rabbi Eliezer. Okay? But you can say that, again, this is Rava explaining what the machloket Rebbe and the rabbis are, and explain that the rabbi's position is based on Rabbi Eliezer, because that's the only way that you could actually spell this out to the end and actually do it in a practical manner. Okay. Now, once we mention that Rabbi Eliezer has this opinion, they say the following. Amalei Rav Acha bereid Rava le Rav Ashi. Now, the son of Rava, Rav Acha, suggests to Rav Ashi a different suggestion based on what we just said. And now we're up to number 3, about what the machloket is. Dilma, perhaps dekule ama mutar la arev chova b'nedava. Maybe everyone thinks that you can combine mincha, nedava and chova. You can just make a stipulation. It's no problem. You do 2 kmatzim, but in theory you could, but in practice you can't because of this issue we just raised. And ha'cha b'de Rabbi Eliezer kamiflage. Maybe the machloket is, do you hold by Rabbi Eliezer that you can offer this kometz and say, if it's not a kometz, then it will be l'shum eitzim, because you hold by Rabbi Eliezer, that's the rabbis. And Rebbe says, no, you can't do that at all. You can't sacrifice from the shirayim on the altar, so this is practically impossible. Theoretically, you could mix nidav and chova. I have no problem with that. The problem is that practically you won't be able to do it because he doesn't hold it by Rabbi Eliezer. So again, de Rabbanan idlahu de Rabbi Eliezer. The rabbis agree with Rabbi Eliezer, as we explained a minute ago in Rava's approach. The Rebbe lately to Rabbi Eliezer, but it's not that Rebbe disagrees and says you can't mix chova and nidava. It's that he thinks theoretically you can, but when it comes out to practicality, how are we going to do this? There's no way to do it because he doesn't hold like Rabbi Eliezer. And that's the problem. That's third possibility about what their machloket is. Amarle, Rav Ashi says to him, wait a minute. If that's what you think, the Rebbe really holds you, theoretically, you can mix chova and nidava in one bowl. I have no problem with that, and make a stipulation when you're doing the kmitza and all that. And the problem just becomes that he doesn't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, and you just won't be able to burn because there's no way to burn them. The second one, Efshar, he says, but there's a very easy solution to this problem. What's the solution? Okay, you ever make challah in 2 batches and you want to take challah from it? So, but you don't have enough in each batch. So what do? You have to just make sure they're touching and take the challah from one, and it covers both as long as they're touching. So here we have a very easy solution. Efshar demaite shitin, instead of doing 60, right, 1 to 60 in 60 different bowls, we have a much better solution. Efshar demaite shitin b'chad mana, put 60 in one bowl. V'chad b'chad mana, and 1 in a separate bowl. If it's a whole problem is how we're going to burn that kometz on the altar, we have a very easy solution. Magalahu v'kamitz. Let's go like this. Take the 60, put them in one bowl. Take a kometz out of there. That's your chova. Now, what's the problem? Your whole problem is that how you're going to be kometz and nidava and burn it on the altar. So fine, take 1 isaron in one bowl, which will save you a lot. You won't have to take another 58 bowls of 2, 3, 4, 5, right, until you get to 59. And take 1. Put the 2 together now, after you took the kometz out of the first one. Have them touching, the one with the 60 minus the kometz. Take a kometz from the second bowl. So the kometz is definitely coming from a different bowl. You can't say, oh, part of it was already burned on the altar. It's completely separate. It's a kometz from a different bowl. And then say this covers whatever part of the big bowl is a nedava, is a voluntary offering. So he doesn't really like that option because he says that would make no sense, that Rebbe would say you'd have to go so extreme. You could resolve it like this. So Rava now comes up with another suggestion. Rava Amar, Dekule alma mutar larev chova b'nidava, udekule alma itle de Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, let's go back to our previous machlokot. Everyone thinks you can mix chova and nidava. Everyone thinks you can hold like Rabbi Eliezer and just say, oh yeah, if it's not nidava, it'll be l'shum eitzim, and you can even burn the komets. So then why does a Rebbe allow this? Hacha, it's a completely different issue. Hacha beplukte de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbanan miflagei. Again, a review of a machloket we saw. Titnan, and now I'll just say it outside. How much oil you're going to put in this? Okay, that's the problem. Why? Right? Normally we say 1 log for every isaron. But if you remember, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says if you have 60 esronim or 20 esronim, it's still just 1 log as long as they're in 1 bowl. So now you're going to have a problem. Because it's not afilu mincha shel 60 isaron noten la 60 log, right? According to Tanakama, a mincha of 60 esronim, you're still going to do 60 logim. In other words, each isaron gets a log. Well, that's going to be fine. If we have possibly a mixture here of mincha, what's the issue? Either it's all obligatory and it's 1 mincha, and then you'll have, right, according to the rabbis, no problem. You'll have 60 esronim and 60 logim. If it's 2 minchas, and you have, let's say, 30-30 or 40-20, it doesn't matter, you're still going to have 60 esronim for those 2 offerings. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov amar afilu mincha shel 60 isaron ein lo ela luga shene'amar lemincha v'log shemen. Right, he darshans that pasuk by the asham. It was by the asham of the leper. But anyway, it says lemincha v'log shemen. Each mincha gets a log shemen. It doesn't matter how big it is. So now you're going to have a problem because, right, Rabbanan savrei ke Rabbanan damri 60 log. The rabbis hold like the rabbis, which is, right, not machloket, which is 60. B'chol chav echad isaron luga kashakel, right? It's 60 log because each isaron gets a log. But Rebbe savar like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov damar ein la ela luga v'lo yadinan ichad minchahi desagele b'chad log ish te menachot ninu de beginan shnei lugim. We don't know. Does it need 1 log because it's 1 mincha because all 60 were maybe what you offered? But if you offered any less than 60, you have 2 minchas, and then you're going to need a log, 2 logs, 1 log for the obligatory one and 1 log for the nedava, and that's Rebbe's position according to the second interpretation of Rava, which was the 4th in our list. Now we get to option 5, Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi amar v'katan v'hevi gadol kamiflagei. This actually is like the most intuitive one, and you know, we just didn't really think about it earlier because we were focused on what Rashi explained there, at least I was, which is what I kind of, you know, explained then because it was hard to, when you read the Mishna, I couldn't possibly bring 5 explanations, so I went with that one because Rashi went with it. But now we have a completely different, which is Rabbanan Savri Katan Vehevi Gadol Yatsa. The rabbis hold that if, and this is a Mishna on the next page, if I say I'm going to bring a small offering and I decide to bring a bigger offering, it's fine. So who cares what I said? If I said 5 and I brought 60, it's totally fine. I could just bring 1 offering of 60 log and it's no problem because I've added. Okay, detracting for sure I can't do, but I can add. The Rebbe savar lo yatzan. Rebbe says, no, you're not going to fulfill your obligation. You have to bring exactly as you said. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. It's very nice to explain our Mishnah in this way, and actually it's the most simple, intuitive explanation. There's no major questions on it. The only question on it is that but then 2 Mishnayot on the next page, we're going to see that there's an exact machloket between them. So what? This Mishnah is just registering the same machloket is there? That makes no sense. Why would you say the same thing twice? Now there, it's talking about animals. Okay? If you say you're going to bring a small animal and you brought a bigger animal, are you yotze? So now we're going to see, well, it's not exactly the same, and you couldn't necessarily have learned one from the other. And then it is the same machloket, but the Mishnah still needed to say it here. This could be true in minchas as well as, you know, even as well as by animals. So that's what we're going to say right now. But first, we're going to say we already said that. It's none. Katan ve'vi gadol yatzat. Rebbe yomer lo yatzat. By an animal. Tzricha. No, we need both. To eat mar baha. If you just had it here, what would you say? Baha ka'amrei rabbanan. In a mincha, you can take instead of 5 esronim, you can bring 60 esronim. And it's fine. Mishum di'idi v'idi kometsu. Why is it fine? Because again, what's inherent about a mincha? What do you do with a mincha? You burn a kometz. Now a kometz on 60 esronim is going to be the exact same size as the kometz on 5 esronim. Because in the end, it's the handful the kohen takes. So in the end, the part that gets burned on the altar is going to be the same whether I did small or big. However, in animals, if you take a small animal and instead you bring a big, you say I'm going to bring a small one, instead you bring a big one, you've brought a much larger amount of imurim, which are the fatty parts and the kidneys, these other parts, that you're going to now burn on the altar. So you're burning something different than you promised in terms of quantity. Okay, whereas in the mincha, it's all the same. So maybe there, maybe they would agree with Rebbe that doesn't work. And that's why you need to say it in both. And now we're going to do the same logic with the opposite. Itmar bahi, if you had it just in the animal case, you would say bahi, the other Mishnah, bahi kama Rebbe. That's where Rebbe says this doesn't work. Aval beha, but in our case, maybe they would agree with the rabbis here for the same reason, because here, in the end, you're only burning one kometz, and maybe Rebbe would agree with the rabbis by us, and that's why it's shricha. That's why you need it. Okay, this is siman. We're not going to go into that, but it's about the next 6 cases that are going to come up in the Mishnayot, the upcoming Mishnayot. So now the Mishnah talks about this. I already introduced today's daf by talking about this, so okay, I'm going to talk about if I used a language, not by mincha, but by something else, and I said, Harei alai etzim, I'm bringing wood. So again, what do you have to do? You have to bring the minimum, because you didn't say, I don't remember how much wood I promised. You just said, I'm bringing wood. What's the minimum wood? So now we can see the minimum in all sorts of promises you can make to the temple. Lo yifchot mishnei gzirim. You have to bring 2 logs, because 2 logs is, if you remember, what they put on before the korban tamid every morning. So that's the minimum. Levona, if you say, I'm giving levona, again, these are voluntary. This isn't for the korban tamid. If you voluntarily offer frankincense, lo yivchot v'kometz. Again, what's the minimum amount of frankincense you can bring? The one you bring for the mincha in general, which is you take a kometz of levona and you burn it with the kometz of the mincha. So if you say, I'm going to voluntarily, not connect it with the mincha, I'm going to voluntarily bring levona, you have to bring a kometz. Haminadev mincha yavi ma kometz levona. If you bring, I skipped a line. Chamisha kmatzim. Okay, there's 5 cases that have a kometz. We actually quoted this Mishnah earlier in the Masechet. There's 5 kometzes. Ha'omer, we actually quoted somewhere where we said this can't be a kometz because it's not listed in the list of 5. Okay, what is it? Ha'omer alai levona lo yivchot mikometz. That's our case. Now we're just off our Mishnah, like our Mishnah is getting on a tangent. Haminadev mincha yavi ma kometz levona. Another kometz is when you promise to bring a mincha, you have to bring a kometz of levona. Hama'alet a kometz bachutz chayav. If this is halat chutz, it was in the parsha we just read, which is, and we spent a lot of time on this at the end of Zvachim, if you offer a kometz outside, right, you take the kometz of the mincha and you burn it outside the temple. So if you did it in the shear of a kometz, if you did less than a kometz, you wouldn't be chayav, but a kometz is the shear that you're going to be obligated. Shnei bezichin tunim shnei kmatzim. Okay, that's really 2 and 1, but it's counted as 2 here. The 2 bezichei levona each need a kometz of frankincense. Those are the ones that go with the lechem hapanim. Okay, next case in the Mishnah. Harei alai zahav. So I'm bringing gold. Lo yivchot midinar zahav. We take the smallest golden coin, which is a dinar zahav. Kesef lo yivchot midinar kesef. We take the smallest silver coin. Nechoshet lo yivchot mime'ah kesef. This is a little different because copper, there were no good coins that were like, no one's going to bring a cheap copper coin to the temple. So what do? You bring a coin, you bring nechoshet in the value of a me'ah of kesef, which is a 1/6 of a dinar of kesef. But perashti, there's a great line. If you said, I promised to give gold, let's say, okay, but I don't remember how much gold I promised. You have to go to the maximum. Now, we don't know what you said until you say, there's no way I would have said that, right? Like, there's no way I would have promised $1 million. I don't have $1 million to promise. So up to that, you have to bring, okay? So until you get to the point where you're sure that that's not what I promised. First thing we're going to do is show how we know that you can be minadev eitzim. You can voluntarily bring eitzim. Tanu Rabbanan korban melamed sheminadvim eitzim. Okay, this is a we also saw. The word ki yakriv korban mincha laHashem in the mincha pasuk, Perek Bet pasuk Aleph of Vayikra that we see many times says korban. Why korban? Mincha is korban. Why do you have to say korban? Korban includes even wood. Kama shnik zirim. V'cheinu omer. How do we know that a eitzim could be called a korban? Because of this pasuk in Nehemiah, Ba'agorot hipanu al korban ha'eitzim. There you see, korban goes with eitzim. Rebbe Omer, eitzim korban him. Rebbe goes farther and he says, listen, eitzim are so much considered a korban that they have all the requirements of a korban, like tunim melach, you have to put salt on it like you put on any korban, and tunim agashad, right? They're just like a mincha that needs to be brought to the altar. There's a special ceremony, you have to, an act of bringing it to the mizbech. Amar Rava. So Rava adds, and we actually saw this whole sugya already, if it sounds familiar. Well, the different Rebbe, if you're going to go with Rebbe on that, it seemed to an kmitza. And as Rebbe says, there's so much a korban that needs this and needs that. So Rava says, well, then it also needs kmitza. You take 2 logs, and then you have to, I guess, break them up into pieces and take a kometz from them, and that gets burned on the altar because it's like a mincha. Amar Papa, the different Rebbe, it seems truchim etzim. This is the funniest line. Wood needs wood. What does that mean, right? You would think you could just burn them on the altar with nothing there because the wood burns. But no, just like the korban tamid, for example, or anything you burn on the altar, there has to be firewood underneath. So when you burn wood as an offering, there has to be firewood underneath it. Okay. Last thing for today. Levona leivchot min hakometz minana. Where do we get this from? You need a kometz. And that it all comes from the mincha. But how do we know by a mincha it's a kometz? Ve'irimi menu bekumtzom, misolat ha-mincha mishamna, ve'et kol ha-levona. Now it says you're going to take the kometz of the solet. It doesn't say kometz by levona. But what do they say? Makish, because levona comes right after that. Makish levona haramad mincha. Maharamad mincha kometz, af levona nami kometz. Just like the solet is kometz, also the levona is a kometz. Tanu Rabbanan, harei alai lamizbech. Okay, now we're going to start a new topic, or like another thing, which you promise, which we'll continue tomorrow, which is you say, I'm going to bring something that's completely burned on the altar. Yavi levona, she'en lecha davar shekarev l'bgamei mizbech, ela levona. Another difference between 2 different languages. If you say, I bring something that's completely burned, levona is the only thing that's completely burned. Now the Gemara is going to ask, aren't there other ones? That's where this stuff ends, but we'll get back there in a minute. But if I said, perashti ve'enu yodea ma perashti, I promised to bring something that burns completely on the altar, but I don't remember which thing I said. Now obviously, it's not clear that you meant only levona, because then you wouldn't say I'm confused. So there must be confusion, and it must be that you think you might have included things that I would say almost everything, or mostly gets burned on the altar, okay? Which would include more things. So then you have to bring yavi mikol davar shekarev lamizbech. You have to bring from all those types. What are they? Rashi says, and it's based on the Gemara in another minute, which is the olat ha'of, where there's just a little part that gets actually thrown out, the morah and the notzah, the crop and the feather gets thrown out. Okay? And the minchat nesachim. Okay, which we're going to see why that's not there, because that also gets completely burned. But why is not in the first category, we're going to see right in a minute. We'll see that actually in tomorrow's stuff. But basically, you have to bring those 3 things because you're not sure which one. Now, the difference between what's the same about all these is that nothing goes given to the Kohanim in these cases. Okay? So, therefore, they're considered things that are completely on the altar, whereas other things like a korban olah, for example, regular korban olah, the high goes to the Kohanim. So that's not completely burned on the Mizbeach, even though it's mostly burned. So now they say v'tuleka, hayika olah, hayika oral Kohanim. So what about an olah? It gets completely burned, so that's what I just said. Now that's not included in the first case, because and not even included in the second, because the high goes to the Kohanim. Hayika olah ha'of, there's also olah ha'of. Okay, so we're going to get to that. So ika morav v'notzah. In other words, all these things have something that gets burned or given to the Kohanim. Okay, and that's why they're not included in the first one. Now, some of them are included in the second one, as I explained. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with the Rabbi Shimon and explained how the 5 could include his 6th case. Really could be included in the 5, and then we dealt with all sorts of issues. We dealt with the 3rd issue today and resolved it. Then we got to why didn't it say minchat nesachim? Okay, we started with that, we ended with it, right? Why was it minchat nesachim? And that's because it has 5 major differences. One of them being that it gets completely burned, which is why it ends up in this sugya. Then we talked about the mincha, esronim, and the machloket, Rebbe and the rabbis. We have 5 different interpretations of how to explain the machloket. And then we started with this case of harei alai eitzim, right? Or levona, how much you have to bring, gold, right? And the difference between saying just harei alai or I said something, I'm not sure what, right? So one we go minimum, the other one we go maximum, because we have to make sure you covered whatever it is you promised. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and b'sorot tovat.